Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town near the German border. His father, Alois Hitler, was a strict and often violent customs official. His mother, Clara, was gentle and affectionate. Hitler adored her. From a young age, he showed signs of intense emotion and pride, but he was also deeply insecure. He struggled in school, especially with discipline. He clashed with teachers, rejected authority, and dreamt of greatness. When his father died in 1903, Hitler was 14. He became more isolated, obsessed with art and German nationalism. He applied twice to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, rejected both times. His drawings were deemed uncreative, lacking talent. Devastated, he lived in Vienna's streets and shelters. It was during these years that his worldview darkened. In Vienna, he encountered fierce anti-Semitism and extreme nationalism. He blamed Jews, communists, and modernists for his failures. While many in Vienna held prejudiced views, Hitler internalized them. He developed a belief in racial purity, Aryan supremacy, and German destiny. By 1913, Hitler fled to Munich to avoid Austrian military service. But fate had other plans. When World War I broke out in 1914, he enlisted in the German army. It was a turning point, a new purpose. He served as a messenger on the Western Front. He was wounded twice, awarded the Iron Cross, but he never rose above corporal to Hitler. The trenches were honorable. His comrades, brothers. Then came 1918, Germany surrendered. The Treaty of Versailles blamed Germany for the war. It imposed crushing reparations and humiliated the nation. Hitler, like many veterans, felt betrayed. He believed Germany had been stabbed in the back by politicians and Jews. This myth, false but powerful, would shape his ideology. The seed of revenge had been planted. After the war, Germany plunged into chaos, revolutions, inflation, starvation, street battles between communists and fascists. Hitler joined a small nationalist group, the German Workers' Party. In 1920, it became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. Hitler discovered he had a talent, oratory. He mesmerized crowds. Filled with fire and fury, he promised strength, pride, and rebirth. He blamed Jews, Marxists, and traitors for Germany's fall. He offered scapegoats and hope. In 1923, Hitler and the Nazis tried to seize power in Munich, the beer hall putsch. It failed. Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison, but it was in prison that he wrote the book that would define his vision, Mein Kampf. In his pages, he outlined his hatred for Jews, his belief in Aryan dominance, his desire for Lebensraum, living space in Eastern Europe, and his plan to make Germany a world power again. When Hitler was released, he rebuilt the Nazi Party. He learned to use democracy to destroy it. He spread propaganda, recruited youth, and won over the disillusioned masses. By the late 1920s, the Nazis were growing, but still fringe. Then came the Great Depression. Germany's economy collapsed again. People were desperate, and desperate people listened to dangerous ideas. The stage was set, and Adolf Hitler was ready to step into history's darkest spotlight. Germany in the early 1930s was a nation on the brink. Unemployment soared. Inflation ravaged savings. Fear ruled the streets. The Weimar Republic, Germany's fragile democracy, was collapsing. Amid the despair, one man promised order and vengeance: Adolf Hitler. The Nazi Party surged in popularity, feeding on economic chaos. In 1930, they became the second largest party in the Reichstag. By 1932, they were the largest, but Hitler wanted more than votes. He wanted control. Germany's president, Paul von Hindenburg, was aging and cautious. He resisted Hitler's ambition at first, but political pressure mounted. Elites feared communism more than fascism. In January 1933, they made a fateful gamble. Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. It was supposed to be a coalition government. They believed they could control it. They were wrong. Within weeks, Hitler acted. In February 1933, the Reichstag building was set on fire. A communist was blamed. The real truth remains debated, but Hitler seized the moment. He convinced Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree. Civil liberties were suspended. Opposition silenced. Mass arrests of communists and political enemies followed. Fear became law. In March 1933, Hitler introduced the Enabling Act. It granted him power to rule by decree without parliament. The act passed. Germany's democracy died that day. The Nazi regime began. Hitler outlawed rival parties. Trade unions were dismantled. Newspapers were censored. The Gestapo, a secret police force, hunted dissenters. Germany was becoming a one-party police state. In July 1934, a threat emerged from within. Ernst Röhm, leader of the SA, had grown too powerful. Hitler feared betrayal. The solution was swift and brutal. On the night of the Long Knives, Hitler ordered a purge. Over 80 SA leaders were executed, rivals, critics, even old allies, eliminated. The army pledged loyalty to Hitler. His grip was complete in 1934. Hindenburg died. Hitler merged the positions of president and chancellor. He became Führer, leader of the Third Reich. Every soldier swore loyalty not to Germany, but to him personally. The transformation was complete. Adolf Hitler was now absolute ruler, and he began reshaping the country in his image. The Nazi regime launched massive propaganda campaigns, films, posters, rallies. They glorified the Führer Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, masterminded public opinion. Schools taught racial theory. Children pledged loyalty to Hitler. The Nazis rearmed the military in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Factories reopened. Jobs returned. The economy improved. On the surface, Hitler was hailed as a savior, but the cost was freedom, and humanity. Jews were targeted from the start. In 1935, the Nuremberg Law stripped them of citizenship. Marriage between Jews and Aryans was banned. They were labeled enemies of the state. Hitler envisioned a racially pure Germany. His speeches became more radical, more apocalyptic. He spoke of destiny, race, and revenge. The world watched, uneasy, but silent. In 1936, Hitler marched troops into the Rhineland. Violating treaties, France and Britain did nothing. Appeasement had begun. Encouraged, Hitler turned outward. In 1938, he annexed Austria. The Anschluss German troops were welcomed in Vienna. That same year, he turned to Czechoslovakia. The Sudetenland, home to ethnic Germans, became his next target. At the Munich conference, European powers gave in peace in our time, declared British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. But it was an illusion. In March 1939, Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. No more pretense of self-determination. He wanted Lebensraum, living space for the German people, and he had one more target in sight: Poland. As Europe held its breath, Hitler made a shocking move. He signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin, Nazi Germany, and Soviet Russia. The world was stunned. The two dictators agreed to divide Eastern Europe. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, had begun. Tanks, planes, and soldiers overwhelmed resistance. Poland fell in weeks. Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. After the swift conquest of Poland in 1939, Adolf Hitler's vision for a new German empire began to unfold rapidly. His military strategy, Blitzkrieg or lightning war, relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. Tanks, aircraft, and infantry moved in coordinated waves. Countries fell one after another. In April 1940, Nazi forces invaded Denmark and Norway to secure strategic positions and iron ore supplies. The world watched in shock as Germany's power grew unchecked. By May, Hitler turned west. He launched an attack on the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. These nations were quickly overwhelmed. Then came France. French and British forces expected a repeat of World War I trench warfare, but Hitler's forces bypassed the heavily fortified Maginot Line by moving through the Ardennes forest. A tactic no one anticipated. Paris fell in June 1940, and France surrendered. The German army occupied the north, while a puppet government ruled the south. This stunning defeat shocked the Allies. Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. Winston Churchill became prime minister and vowed to fight on at all costs. Hitler planned to invade Britain next, Operation Sea Lion. But first, Germany needed air superiority. The Battle of Britain began in July 1940. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, launched relentless bombing raids. British Royal Air Force pilots fought fiercely. Radar technology and determined defense helped Britain resist. For months, the skies burned with dogfights and destruction. Though London suffered heavy damage, the Nazis failed to gain control. Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. Meanwhile, in 1941, the Axis powers grew stronger. Italy joined Germany, Japan expanded in Asia and the Pacific. But Hitler had grander ambitions. He eyed the vast lands of the Soviet Union. In June 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa. Over 3 million German troops invaded Soviet territory, the largest military operation in history. The initial advance was devastating. Cities fell, millions of Soviet soldiers were captured or killed, but the Red Army regrouped and resisted fiercely. The brutal Russian winter halted the German advance. Stalingrad and Moscow became symbols of fierce resistance. At the same time, Hitler's racial policies led to unspeakable horrors. Millions of Jews, Roma, disabled individuals, and others deemed undesirable were rounded up. They were sent to ghettos, labor camps, and extermination camps. The final solution aimed to annihilate Europe's Jewish population. Death camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor became factories of murder. By 1942, the scale of genocide was staggering. 6 million Jews would perish, alongside millions of other victims. As the war dragged on, the Allies grew stronger. The United States entered the war after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The tide began to turn, but Hitler refused to surrender. He declared total war, demanding sacrifices from all Germans. The regime tightened control, suppressing dissent and increasing propaganda. Victory seemed impossible, but Hitler's fanaticism blinded him to reality. By 1942, the tide of World War II began to turn against Adolf Hitler and the Axis powers. The Allies, primarily the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, launched coordinated efforts to push back the Nazi advance. The Battle of Stalingrad became a decisive turning point. For months, brutal fighting raged in the ruined city. The Soviet Red Army encircled and defeated the German 6th Army in early 1943. This devastating loss marked the first major defeat for Hitler's forces and crushed the myth of Nazi invincibility. Meanwhile, in North Africa, Allied forces fought to remove Axis powers from the continent. The harsh desert warfare tested the limits of endurance and strategy. General Bernard Montgomery led British forces to victory at El Alamein in late 1942. This victory secured control of the Suez Canal and opened the path to Italy. Hitler's ally, Benito Mussolini, faced growing opposition in Italy. In 1943, Allied troops invaded Sicily and then mainland Italy. Mussolini was deposed and Italy switched sides. But German forces quickly moved to occupy northern Italy and continue the fight across the English Channel. Preparations for the largest amphibious invasion in history were underway. Operation Overlord, known as D-Day, was meticulously planned for months. On June 6, 1944, over 156,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. Facing fierce German resistance, the soldiers fought through heavy fire, mines, and obstacles. Despite huge casualties, the invasion succeeded. The liberation of France accelerated rapidly. Paris was freed in August 1944. Hitler's grip on Western Europe weakened. In the east, Soviet forces pushed relentlessly westward. They liberated vast territories and advanced towards Germany's borders. As the Allies closed in from east and west, Hitler's world began to collapse. Behind the front lines, Nazi Germany faced internal chaos. The July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler by German officers failed. The regime responded with brutal purges. Fear and suspicion gripped the nation. As winter approached in 1944, the Battle of the Bulge became Germany's last desperate attempt to break Allied lines in Belgium. The surprise offensive initially caught the Allies off guard, but fierce resistance and harsh weather eventually halted the attack. This marked the last major German offensive in the West. Meanwhile, the Holocaust continued unabated. Nazi death camps operated until the final months of the war. Liberation by Allied forces revealed the horrifying extent of the genocide. The world was confronted with the unimaginable scale of human suffering caused by Hitler's regime. By early 1945, Allied forces were closing in on Berlin from all sides. The end of Hitler's reign was near, but his obsession with total victory made him refuse to surrender. Instead, he prepared for a final catastrophic defense of the Nazi capital. Europe was on the brink of liberation and destruction. By early 1945, the Nazi Empire was collapsing under the relentless pressure of the Allied forces. From the West, American, British, and French armies advanced steadily across Germany. From the East, the Soviet Red Army surged forward in a fierce, unstoppable march toward Berlin. Inside the German capital, the atmosphere was grim and desperate. Hitler retreated into his Führer bunker, a fortified underground shelter beneath the Reich Chancellery. Surrounded by his closest advisors and loyalists, he clung to delusions of victory, even as the city burned above him. The Battle of Berlin was one of the bloodiest of the war. Soviet troops encircled the city by April 1945, unleashing massive artillery bombardments and fierce urban combat. German soldiers and civilians alike were caught in the hellish siege. Desperation and chaos spread through the city. As Soviet forces closed in, Hitler's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He married Eva Braun in the Führer bunker on April 29th in a brief and somber ceremony. The next day, April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide alongside Eva Braun. His death marked the symbolic end of Nazi Germany's reign of terror. Shortly afterward, Berlin fell to the Soviets. The remaining German forces surrendered unconditionally. On May 7, 1945, Germany officially capitulated to the Allies, marking victory in Europe Day, VE Day. Europe was finally free from the tyranny of Hitler's regime. The aftermath revealed the staggering scale of destruction. Cities lay in ruins, millions of lives were lost, and the horrors of the Holocaust shocked the world. The Nuremberg trials began soon after, holding Nazi leaders accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Hitler's legacy is one of unprecedented evil and devastation. His ruthless pursuit of power led to a war that engulfed the globe and caused unimaginable suffering. Yet the world also witnessed resilience and unity in the face of darkness. The defeat of Nazi Germany remains a testament to the courage of those who fought to end tyranny. But the scars of the war and the Holocaust continue to remind humanity of the dangers of hatred, extremism, and unchecked power. The story of Adolf Hitler is a stark warning from history, never to be forgotten or repeated. The fall of Adolf Hitler did not bring immediate peace to a wounded world. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new global reality shaped by destruction, division, and distrust. Germany lay in ruins. Its cities bombed, its economy shattered, and its people struggling to comprehend the scale of their defeat. The victorious Allies divided Germany into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, the capital, was likewise divided, though it sat deep within the Soviet zone. Tensions among the Allies soon emerged, especially between the Western powers and the Soviet Union. From these divisions, a new conflict was born: the Cold War. What had once been unity against fascism turned into ideological rivalry between democracy and communism. The Iron Curtain fell across Europe. In 1949, Germany was officially split into 2 separate nations. The Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, aligned with the West. The German Democratic Republic, East Germany, became a Soviet satellite. The Berlin Wall would rise in 1961, a concrete symbol of a divided world. But even amid geopolitical shifts, the shadow of Hitler remained. The Holocaust left a scar on humanity. 6 million Jews murdered, along with millions of others, including Roma, Slavs, disabled individuals, LGBTQ+ people, and political dissidents. The world pledged never again. The Nuremberg trials, beginning in late 1945, were the first international courts to hold leaders accountable for crimes against humanity. Top Nazi officials stood trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Footage of liberated concentration camps shocked the world. Skepticism turned into horror as the truth was laid bare. Many were sentenced to death or life imprisonment. but not all perpetrators faced justice. Some fled, living in hiding for decades. Others were quietly absorbed into post-war societies. Meanwhile, survivors tried to rebuild their shattered lives. Many emigrated to Israel, the United States, or other safe havens. Memorials, museums, and educational institutions emerged to preserve their stories and warn future generations. In Germany itself, a long process of reckoning began. Denazification was imposed by Allied authorities, but it took years for Germans to fully confront their past. For some, Hitler remained a figure shrouded in myth and distortion, but for most, he came to represent the darkest potential of humanity. The psychological impact on post-war Germany was profound. Guilt, shame, silence. Generations grew up asking, how could it happen here? Hitler's twisted ideology of racial purity, authoritarian rule, and violent nationalism had nearly succeeded in remaking Europe. It took a world united in war to stop him. But the warning signs were always there. In times of hardship, fear, and division, people can be seduced by easy answers and powerful voices. Hitler exploited national humiliation, economic despair, and societal divisions. He rose through democratic systems only to destroy them. The world would not forget. To understand Adolf Hitler is to confront the deepest shadows of the human psyche. He was not a monster born in myth, but a man, complex, broken, and disturbingly ordinary. What made him capable of unleashing such evil on the world? Hitler's ideology was shaped by a toxic mix of personal failures, resentment, and radical beliefs. He believed in racial hierarchy, where Aryans were considered superior. He despised Jews, Slavs, communists, and anyone who did not fit his vision of a pure German state. His charisma was undeniable to many in post-World War I Germany. He spoke with passion, conviction, and a dangerous clarity. He offered scapegoats for national suffering and promised glory and revival. To a broken nation, he appeared as a savior, yet beneath the surface, Hitler was deeply insecure. He feared intimacy, distrusted close relationships, and kept emotional distance even from those closest to him. His romantic relationship with Eva Braun was hidden from the public, and he remained aloof even to his inner circle. He was a master manipulator, knowing how to exploit fear, myth, and spectacle. Through propaganda and censorship, he crafted a godlike image of himself. Joseph Goebbels, his minister of propaganda, ensured that every German home heard his voice, saw his face, and felt his presence. But the man behind the image was more fragile than the myth suggested. Paranoia consumed him. In his final years, he grew increasingly erratic. He distrusted his generals, dismissed sound advice, and relied on delusions of invincibility. Historians have long debated Hitler's mental health. Was he mad or simply evil? Evidence points to a man with a grandiose sense of self, sociopathic tendencies, and extreme narcissism. But these traits alone do not explain the millions who followed him. He was not alone. His rise depended on the support of elites, businessmen, military officers, and ordinary citizens. People chose to look away, to conform, to participate. It is this complicity that makes the Nazi era so chilling. In private, Hitler was strangely ascetic. He abstained from alcohol, rarely ate meat, and lived a regimented life. But this discipline masked a soul bent on domination and destruction. He had no children, no lasting friendships, and no life outside politics. His identity was fused with his ideology. He lived for the Nazi cause and died with it. He demanded total loyalty, and when Germany began to fall, he blamed the people, not himself. Even in death, he sought control. His body was burned to deny the world a trophy, but the ruins he left behind could not be hidden. Books, films, and academic studies continue to examine his life, but no single theory fully captures the depth of his darkness. Perhaps that's what makes him so terrifying. Not that he was inhuman, but that he was human. A human being who chose evil, embraced it, and convinced millions to follow. The world watches his story not just to understand history, but to guard the present. Because somewhere, in times of fear and turmoil, the echoes of his voice still try to return. The world that emerged after Adolf Hitler was not the same. His actions reshaped the 20th century in ways still felt today. Boundaries were redrawn, alliances reimagined, and human conscience forever awakened. Europe, once the heart of two devastating world wars, became the focus of unity and reconstruction. Nations that had been enemies forged new bonds to ensure such horrors would never repeat. Germany itself became the symbol of reflection and redemption. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others, redefined how the world viewed evil. It wasn't just mass murder, it was industrialized extermination, a machine of death designed by a modern state. Never before had the world witnessed such cruelty cloaked in bureaucracy. In response, global movements for human rights took form. The United Nations was born in 1945 with the aim of preserving peace. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, was a direct response to the crimes of the Nazi regime. Education became a tool of resistance. The Holocaust was taught in schools. Museums such as Yad Vashem in Israel and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington were built to honor victims and keep the memory alive. For Germany, Hitler's legacy was a burden and a mission. The country embarked on a process of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coming to terms with the past. Memorials were erected not to glorify, but to mourn. New generations asked hard questions. Oh, how did we let this happen? What would we have done? The figure of Hitler became a warning etched in every history book, a symbol of totalitarianism, of hatred given political power, of what humanity must resist. And yet, extremist ideologies still find echoes in modern times. Neo-Nazism, hate speech, racism, they did not die with him. That's why his story matters now more than ever. In popular culture, Hitler remains a dark icon. Films, documentaries, novels, and studies explore his rise and fall from every angle. He's portrayed as a monster, a madman, a manipulator. But perhaps the most chilling portrayals are those that show him as disturbingly ordinary. Because if someone so human could do so much harm, then the danger is not only in one man. It lies in fear, in silence, in blind loyalty, in the surrender of truth to propaganda and reason to rage. Hitler's legacy is a cautionary tale. One that spans borders, languages, and generations. He changed the face of warfare, of diplomacy, and of morality. Even now, nations shape policies to avoid repeating the past. The European Union was built in part to ensure unity in place of nationalism. The Geneva Conventions were strengthened. The crime of genocide was defined and prosecuted under international law. We remember not out of obsession with evil, but to guard the light. Every survivor's testimony, every grave, every name etched in the stone is a beacon, a call never to forget. The ashes of Hitler's empire left behind a world sobered but strengthened, a world reminded of how fragile civilization can be and how vital it is to protect it. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. The story of Adolf Hitler is not just a chronicle of one man's cruelty, it's a mirror held up to humanity. He rose not from strength but from fear, not from brilliance but from resentment. He fed off the chaos of a broken nation, offering false hope in exchange for blind obedience. The lesson is not that Hitler was unique. It's that under the right conditions, economic despair, cultural fear, political polarization, history can produce another. That is what we must guard against. In times of crisis, we seek saviors, but when power is unchecked, when dissent is silenced, when truth is twisted into propaganda, danger follows. Democracy dies not in sudden violence, but in gradual surrender. Hitler's rise teaches us the fragility of freedom. How quickly civil rights can vanish, how easily hatred can be weaponized, how silence can become complicity. But there are also lessons of resistance. The courage of those who spoke out, even when it meant death. The bravery of soldiers who fought not for conquest, but for justice. The resilience of survivors who rebuilt their lives from the ruins of genocide. And their stories are the light in the darkness. They remind us that even in humanity's lowest moments, there were those who stood up, who said no, who protected the innocent, hid the hunted, resisted the regime. Every generation faces its own struggles. We live in an age of misinformation, division, and extremism. The story of Hitler is not ancient history, it is a warning. What kind of world do we want to leave behind? What kind of leaders do we empower? What values do we defend when they are tested? Hitler's legacy is not a relic to be buried. It's a responsibility to remember in classrooms, in books, in film, in museums, and in the hearts of those who lost everything. We carry the memory forward, not to dwell on evil, but to build a better world. A world where no one is judged by race or faith, where power is held accountable, where freedom is cherished, and history is taught with honesty. In the ruins of Berlin, where his empire fell, there is no statue of Adolf Hitler. No shrine, no monument, only silence. And that silence speaks volumes because the world did not remember him to honor him. It remembered to never become him.